It looks like it's 12 o'clock, and welcome to the Small Town Big Crime panel. I'm Amy Reade, and I hope everybody can see all the other three panelists that I have today. I'd like to thank everybody for coming. I see on the chat, we've got people from all over the place joining us here today, and a special thanks to Katie Kelly and everyone at the Suffolk Mystery Authors Festival for putting all this together and dealing with all of the participants scattered all over the place and all the tech and everything. So it's really a wonderful experience for all of us. So I'm going to get started. I'm going to introduce all our panelists, and I'm going to go in alphabetical order by last name. So we're going to start with Mollie Cox Bryan, and on my screen, she's down in the lower left-hand corner. I don't know if everybody can see her. Mollie Cox Bryan is the author of the Cumberland Creek Mysteries, the Cora Crafts Mysteries, the Buttermilk Creek Mysteries, and under the pen name Maggie Blackburn, the Beach Reads Mysteries. She's recently released a novella mystery series called the Victoria Town Mysteries, and her books have been selected as finalists for the Agatha Award and the Daphne du Maurier Award, and as a top 10 beach reads by Woman's World magazine. She makes her home in the foothills of the Blue Ridge Mountains in the Shenandoah Valley of Virginia. Next, we have Mary Ellen Hughes, who on my screen is right below me. Mary Ellen is the national best-selling author of 11 mystery novels set in her home state of Maryland or in upstate New York, one of the latest being the Keepsake Cove series. For a change of pace and possibly to confuse everybody, she wrote her next book as Emmy Caldwell, setting a wicked yarn at a craft fair in Pennsylvania and featuring an amateur sleuth who knits. Besides writing, Mary Ellen enjoys tennis, cats, food, and manages to slip them into many of her books. Her website is maryellenhughes.com. Next, I will introduce myself. I am Amy Reade. I am the author of 3 standalone Gothic mysteries, the Malice series of Gothic mysteries, the Juniper Junction Holiday Mystery series, and the Cape May Historical Mystery Collection. I used to practice law, and now I write fiction full-time in my home state of New Jersey. And finally, last but not least, is Grace Topping. Grace is an Agatha Award finalist and USA Today bestselling author of the Laura Bishop Home Staging Cozy Mystery Series. She is a recovering technical writer and IT project manager, accustomed to writing lean, boring documents, and I can relate to that. Let loose to write fiction, she's now killing off characters, a reminder of people she dealt with during her career. She is the former vice president of the Chesapeake chapter of the Sisters in Crime and the membership copy of the Sisters in Crime Coffee chapter. So welcome to everybody. I want to know, I think we'll just start off with my very first question, which is, did you grow up in a small town? So Mary Ellen, why don't you start?
Okay, actually, can you hear?
Mm-hmm.
Okay,
Yes.
I'm looking at the little grid and it doesn't light up. Um, I grew up in a small city or a big small town, whatever you want to say. It is Milwaukee, Wisconsin. And it was small enough that you kind of had connections to almost everybody you would run into, but big enough that it had, theaters and restaurants and places to go and all that. So but I just feel like the neighborhoods too became a small town. You got to know everybody in there, so a little bit of everything.
Can I just note, if when Mary Ellen speaks, it might help if the attendees turned up the volume on their computer. I find that's making it easier for me to hear you. So, Mollie, Grace, Mollie, you want to go next?
Sure. I grew up in the country. The nearest town was probably 20, 25 miles away, and it was a small steel mill town of Aliquippa, Pennsylvania. And now I live in kind of a small, I think of it as a small town, but some people think of it as a small city, Waynesboro, Virginia, which is, it's like a population of about 20,000.
Okay. Grace?
Actually, I grew up in a small city, Altoona, Pennsylvania. uh, but I find that growing up in a, like you mentioned, or one of you mentioned earlier about neighborhoods, my life growing up centered around my church and church school, parochial schools. And, your life centers around that. So it's almost like that small community, which gives you a feel of a small town, even though you're living in a small city of 70,000 people.
Yeah, I agree. I grew up in what's considered a small city, I guess. But as I was preparing for this panel, I got thinking of the times the years I lived in New York City, and you don't think of New York City as a cozy spot to set a mystery, but the neighborhoods are so diverse in New York, and people really are defined, I think, in part by the neighborhoods they live in. So even in a small city, I'm thinking of the Soho or Greenwich Village or whatever, Upper East Side, something like that. You really get a feel for a very small area, even if it's a big place. So, what are the characteristics that you find are universal in small towns? Grace, I'll start with you.
I think one is the relationships of the people there. You know more people because you're close to them. There are as many people. I think you care about them, some of them. I think people can relate to that. They like reading about the fact that when you go into a place, the characters know a lot of people. In my book, I have a lot of my scenes set in a coffee shop, which I view as the crossroads of my community. That way I can have people run into people they wouldn't ordinarily see in their everyday life. So by taking, my book from a small town, college town, and then even narrowing it a little bit more to a coffee shop setting, you get a lot of more of the dynamics of the people that way.
Mollie?
Well, yeah, I think that community is pretty tight, and I also think of things like churches. What Grace mentioned before. If you're in a lot of ways, I mean, that was one of the surprises I found when I moved to Waynesboro from Washington D.C. One of the first questions people ask you is what church you go to, and in D.C. nobody talked about that.
Right.
So you're kind of defined by that in some ways, and you're also defined by it if you don't go to any of those churches. There's also let's see, there's like community centers. I guess they have community centers in big cities too, and like some of those bigger neighborhoods. But there's always community center. The fire department is always doing cool things with the community. So I think it's a hard place for you to have a lot of secrets, because there's always somebody that knows what's going on at your house.
How about you, Mary Ellen? Are there special characteristics that you think are particular to small towns? I'm not hearing Mary Ellen.
Small towns have people, and small towns have good people, likable people, curmudgeons. It's going to be a mix of everything that you'd like to put in a book. You think of a small town as being all full of lovely, cozy, wonderful people, but there's also going to be a few, that you'd rather not have there, and you have to put up with them. So I guess that's universal, and what I think you said about New York, it surprised me the first time I went there. I thought of New York as being this huge mass of people, but it's divided up into small neighborhoods, which become their small towns. And so every city is its own little small town in some part of it.
So let's talk about specific small towns, like Mollie. I know from reading your books and from talking to you, I just want to point out for everyone that Mollie is the first author friend I made. She was the first author I met after I signed my first contract. And so I have a very special place in my heart for Mollie.
Oh.
So her books are set, let's see, Cumberland Creek, Indigo Gap, Buttermilk Creek, Shenandoah Springs, and Bridget's Island. And Victoria Town. Did I get them all?
Yeah, I think you did.
Okay. So how do these towns, how are they different in your own mind, in your writing? How do you put yourself in one town and then put yourself in another town and it's a different place? How do you do that? Do you understand the question? Am I making myself clear?
Yeah.
Okay.
Mm-hmm. Well, I think with different series, of course, it's different. Most of my books are set where I live in the Shenandoah Valley, which is, there's, it's pretty diverse, the different towns in the Valley. I mean, you've got everything from Harrisonburg, Virginia, which has James Madison University and so many people, and to like the rural areas. So there's a lot of choice there. And my first series was set in a town, Cumberland Creek, which is was sort of a mix up of like the local small towns around me, which are like Stanton and Waynesboro and Lexington, Virginia. Mm-hmm. And then the next, let's see, the Shenandoah, the other series with the cows and the Buttermilk Creek series. Yeah. That's definitely, more out in the rural areas. And I definitely, I use some of the local landmarks and stuff like that for that. But the Indigo Gap series, that was really inspired by a trip that I took to North Carolina, to Western North Carolina. And I love to craft, and I was so inspired by the heritage of crafting in that area. And I sort of made up this town, and I always make up the towns and the islands and all those places, sort of based on other places. Mm-hmm. I don't want people to get distracted by thinking, oh, I know that place, and it sort of takes them out of the story. So usually I don't do that. So I think to your question is, how do I keep myself in those places? If I ever find, well, I am in one of those places, mm-hmm. Shenandoah Valley, right? But like with Indigo Gap, if I find that I'm needing a little inspiration or feeling like I need to be more grounded in a place, I definitely go to YouTube and Google, mm-hmm. and places like that, which really helps. So I hope that answers your question.
Yeah, it does. So Grace, you've described where the Laura Bishop mysteries take place. It's, I believe, Lewiston, Pennsylvania. Is that right?
Yes.
And you've described it as a small city.
Yes.
So is that based on, I don't know Pennsylvania all that well. I don't know if there is a Lewiston. Is that based on a particular
town? It's based on my hometown. There's some references there if people were really careful about it, but I made it a small college town, mm-hmm. which the college element kind of brings in some spice sometimes. But
right.
There is a Lewistown, Pennsylvania, Lewis, but this is Louis. So there is no place like that. So, you can be more creative doing that. You don't have to, identify that there's a drugstore in this corner in a town and people go, no, there's no drugstore in that corner. So you have a lot of political license when you make up your own town.
Okay. And now, Mary Ellen, this goes back to what we were talking about, neighborhoods. You have what I think is a small town, Mapleton, and then the Keepsake Cove mysteries are within a small neighborhood in Lewiston. in Mapleton. I can't hear you. Can you say that again?
I had to think back, I'm still.
Oh.
Oh, yes, Mapleton. Keepsake Cove was a town within a town. It was like the shopping area.
Mm-hmm.
And all the shops had keepsakes or collectibles. And so they called themselves Keepsake Cove. But they were run by the municipal part of Mapleton.
Okay, and and I know your books written by as Emmy Caldwell are set again in Crandallsburg, Pennsylvania, but in a very small part of Crandallsburg at a craft fair. Now, that's correct, right?
Pretty much, yes.
Okay, so are all the books in the series going to be set at that craft fair?
Well, my main character is a crafter, and she's a vendor at the craft fair. Can you hear? Did you lose me or?
No, we can hear you.
Oh, okay.
I can hear you. I'm not sure. Okay.
Okay. My main character lives in Crandallsburg, and the craft fair only runs on the weekends. So she's at the craft fair on the weekends, and when she's home, in the middle of the week, she's talking to her neighbors and doing other things in parts of the city. So she gets around and she has to investigate whatever murder. So she can't do that all stuck at the craft fair. So she has to be in the town.
Okay. I know I know my first book that I wrote, it was a Gothic mystery called Secrets of Halstead House. And I based the town in that book. I called it Cape Cartier, but it was based loosely on a town, Alexandria Bay, up in New York. And I remember changing it because, as Mollie said, when people know the town that it's based on, it kind of takes the reader out of the story if they're thinking, oh, you can't make a left at that corner, or oh, there's a chocolate shop, that's not a gas station. So you don't want to get those emails from people who say, you got the town wrong. So I think it's just easier to make up your own town and maybe base it loosely on something. And my Juniper Junction mysteries, Juniper Junction is a small resort town in Colorado in the Rockies. And that's sort of not based on any one town, but an amalgamation of different ski towns and small resort areas in Colorado. So, it gives you full license to work with really whatever you want. You can make the town your own. I don't want to miss, I've been trying to keep track of the questions. I did see one. Given that small towns don't have a lot of people in them, how do you choose who gets killed off? So have at it. Who wants to take this one?
Well, I usually I will kill off people that are not good people.
Mm-hmm.
That's one of my things. And if there's like a new person in town, they might be the person. Yeah. So that's just me.
Travel to your town, right?
Yeah.
I had a hard time with this recently. My first book, of course, it was a little bit more melodramatic, where I killed off the most despicable person in town. It was kind of a no-brainer. But my most recent one, the third one coming out, I was killing off someone who was just a sweet person. And I even put it out on the Sisters in Crime saying, are people going to be upset that I've killed off this sweet person? But sometimes you have to move the story along, and if the sweet person is the person who's going to move the story along, she's gone. So
you can't kill the main character, you can't kill her best friend, you can't kill somebody that you want to have in the next book of the series. So you kind of have to bring in somebody new or somebody who's been hanging around, but you didn't know too well until that time. And it's easier if you pick somebody that's nasty. But in my last one, the one that's coming out next year, it's somebody who's rather sweet. And when I sent the chapters to my critique group, they said, "Oh no, you killed off that person." But you do what you have to do.
Mm-hmm. I'm seeing notes that you don't kill the dog and you don't kill the cat.
Oh no, or a cat.
So
No.
When I had written a book set in Hawaii, and the main character took her cat with her when she moved there, and I know I got at least one phone call saying I can't read this anymore, because there was a scene involving the cat, and this person called me and said, please tell me that this cat is okay, because I have to stop reading if anything happens to the cat. I said, keep reading, you're fine. I will not kill off the animals in my books. So
readers are cozy, and they love their animals.
Oh yeah.
I was at Malice and had a fan come up to me before my first book came out, and she said, "Do you have any cats in your book?" And I said, "No." And she turned around and walked away. No goodbye, no nothing. She went looking for another cat writer. And that night I went home and put a cat in my book. But then you have to remember, as an author, you got to feed that cat. You got to take care of it.
It's true.
People saying, "How did you go off for the weekend and just leave your cat?" So
it's true. It's true. Luckily, cats are easier than dogs that way. So let me see. Somebody asked if we make maps of our towns. Mary Ellen, take it. Anyone who wants to answer, go ahead. But
I haven't made any maps, no. It's all in my head, and I try to describe it, and it's a small town, so it's not that much,
mm-hmm.
And then if I want somebody to make a left turn somewhere, I can make them do a left and not change the map,
Yeah, I've made my first series. I made little maps that I would never show anybody. They're not artistic at all, but just to kind of navigate, and get myself, situate myself. I have done that, but that was really just with my first series. And I do write a series that's set in New York City, and I have used maps for that. Yeah.
That you put in the book, or
no. Like,
okay, all right.
Because
these are your maps that you drew then.
That I drew. For
okay.
myself.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. All right. How about Grace? Have you?
Since I've based it on, a place that I know very well, although I haven't lived there in probably 40 or 50 years, I kind of have an idea in my mind. As a writer, you almost have a picture of your area and of your characters. And, I can just almost envision going down that road or where that house is set. So no, I have a kind of a layout of it in my mind.
Mm-hmm.
But if it gets more complicated, I may have to.
I have found it useful to draw maps for a couple of different books, and only to make sure, like, they're terrible maps. I would never show them to anybody, like Mollie said, but I need to kind of situate it in my own mind, so I know, for example, how long it takes to get from one place to another place, and have I described it so that they're far enough away from each other, or just to keep track in my own head, I put the grocery store next to this store, right, so that, when it comes time to mention those places again, they're still in the proper order. And I know I saw Drew mentioned she likes maps in the front of books, and I love maps in the front of books too. I think it's particularly useful in a fantasy book, but not necessarily. Like, I like a map in any book. And I remember talking to my editor at one time about putting a map in, and it was logistically not a simple request. I had the same issue with the family tree I had put that I wanted to put in the front of the book. Not a simple request, not as simple as I expected it to be. So for that reason, there are no maps in my books, and not that I've seen in any of yours. So let's see, I just want to make sure I'm getting all these. Oh, someone's mentioning main character descriptions also in your books, which, I mean, that's not particular to small town books, but any books I'm finding, sometimes those main character descriptions are helpful, particularly when you have a lot of characters, or particularly when the market for readers is from a different country than where the story is set. Do you guys do that? Not that I remember, that you have any character lists or descriptions in the fronts of your books?
I do for the Buttermilk Creek series, which is Goodnight Moo and Christmas Cowbells, because I have animal characters. I have 3 cows,
Okay.
and several, and a dog and a cat, and a whole community of people in that book. And it was actually a suggestion of my agent. I'm not my agent, my editor at the time. Martin, yeah.
Well, being a fairly new author, I'm only just now finishing my 3rd book. I'm still learning, but I find that writing descriptions, I don't know how much to put in there. So I really kind of go on the lean side of describing. I might just say, her long hair covered her face, or, whatever. We've all read books where every character that comes on the scene, they've described everything they're wearing. And I thought, well, I'm trying to avoid that. But I probably just go to the length of talking about maybe how tall she is, color of hair, just simple things. One character is, very petite, but I don't want to get into, a whole lot of description. Somebody said something about skip the parts that people skip over, or don't include the parts that people skip over.
Right.
If you go to lengthy descriptions, especially of what every character's wearing, they're going to be skipping over that. So why spend time on it?
I think that changes too over time. I think lots of things in books change over time. I'm thinking Charles Dickens. I love Charles Dickens, but really the descriptions go on and on and on. And then
he was paid by the word.
What?
He was paid by the word.
That would help. So I'm thinking of these books that I really enjoyed that were written in the 50s and 60s. Those describe clothing and people's appearances really in depth. And I think now we've progressed to a point where people are less interested. People's attention spans, they have so many other things that are vying for their attention. When they sit down to read a book, they don't want those descriptions. They want the action.
Or the dialogue. They want the dialogue.
Right. Yes.
Important. I try to put in the description. You need to know how old a person is, approximately. Right. But as far as what their clothing, if it matters to the plot, I'll put it in. That they're going to change their something or other to hide, to disguise themselves. I don't know, whatever. But I do remember Stephen King. I read his book on writing, and not everybody loves Stephen King, but he is a fabulous writer. I mean, he goes into grisly things, but not for a cozy reader. But he did say in this book that he really didn't go into much description of his main character. He just gave the very basics and let the reader imagine what they would, which goes into a problem when they make a movie of the book and somebody has that vision of what the main character is, and it's totally different in the movie. But I don't think I'll have that problem.
Maybe you will. That would be nice. And actually, somebody is asking about, do you have people in mind when you create your characters? Actors specifically, and somebody is saying, do you cast your main characters as if the book is going to be a movie? So, Molly, you want to take that one?
No, but I think that sounds like a fun idea. And I did that for my first series, for the Cumberland Creek series.
Mm-hmm.
After I knew that there were writers, I found out that there were writers that were doing that. And it seems like it's mostly romance writers that do that. They put on Pinterest boards, who they, and so I tried that with my Cumberland Creek series, but I haven't done it since then. And it's, that's been a while ago now. So I don't even know if any of those actors are still around. But yeah, I think it would be fun. Yeah, but I don't do that as a rule. No.
Okay.
I find the hardest challenge right now is describing more diverse characters. I've tried to make my characters different ethnic groups, but you don't want to just come out and say, well, this is my African-American character, So I've described my young Tyrone as the next Denzel Washington, and hope people know what I'm talking about, and let it just unfold that they're just all characters. You don't want to be so specific, but I thought that was just enough description to identify him as a young Black man, that he's aspiring to be, the next Denzel Washington. And, but describing, people from different ethnic groups, it can be challenging.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. To get back to the small town questions, I remember reading that, I think it was Anne Cleves who said that she had to stop a series because they're, set in on an island in Scotland, and eventually it just became too implausible that all these people were getting killed off. Like she couldn't keep killing off people in this tiny place. Do you think that small town series do kind of die a natural death at some point because you've just created so much mayhem in such a small place? Mary Ellen?
Do, and my series, I have 4 of them, I don't know, something like that, have all been three books per series, and I just can't imagine keeping it going longer, because for that very reason, after a while, every new person that comes to town, the reader says, okay, either the victim or the murderer, and it just you run out of people. And I think some authors have solved it, like Maddie Hunter has the Passport to Peril, and her characters, it's a group of travelers, and they all go to different countries, and then there's a whole new set of people there that you can prey on, and a wonderful idea. I wish I had had it. Small towns do have a problem.
But
how about?
I'm sorry. I was just going to say, you have to suspend disbelief. You picked up a series. You don't have to sit there and think, well, 20 people have been killed. I mean, otherwise people would no longer be watching Midsummer Murders, where there's about 3 or 4 murders per, session in this small county of Midsummer England. I don't even think about that. I just pick up, is the story interesting? Are the characters engaging? And, whether 20 people had been killed in that same community, they're in different books. I don't care.
I have kind of a different take on this. I think that the only difference, between a city and a small town when it comes to crime is that there's just more people in the city, but that's the only reason there's more crime. So I think, I think you could go for quite some time. That said, my Cora Craft series, I have them traveling and doing craft events. So I think that's a good way of, getting your characters out. And I also did that with my scrapbooking series. They went on a scrapbooking cruise. So I think there are ways that you can work around that. And also, like if you're doing a hotel or some other kind of business, like the craft business, the Cora Crafts books were set at a craft retreat. You have different people coming in all the time.
Right.
That's all. A recipe for murder right there. So
excuse me. Let's see. Here's one I wanted to ask about, and this sort of dovetails with a question that we received in the chat here. Are there negatives to placing your stories in a small town? And do you find that that setting places limits on your ability to write those settings? Grace, let's start with you.
My problem is my character is a homestager. And in the first book, the homeowner is murdered. Well, I cannot have her go in and stage home and have the owner of the home killed, and every book have the homeowner. He's just going to be out of business pretty soon. So I had to come up with ways to have her broaden her circle of people and the things that she does, but still keep it tied into her business. That's the one thing about cozies is, it's usually around the interest, whether it's craft fairs or whatever. But that was a challenge. I thought I can't keep killing off the homeowners. So
that's bad for business. Yeah. Mary Ellen, do you have thoughts about it?
I haven't come across too many negatives other than possibly running out of people if it went on too much longer. But if you create a fictional town, you can add things that you need as needed.
Mm-hmm.
In my newest one, A Wicked Yarn, I had my character's daughter working at an alpaca farm, which was just outside of town, and had fun setting all this with the alpacas, who I think they are fantastic. I mean, you talk about cats and dogs. I mean, alpacas are even double cute. But anyway, you can create things in your small town and get around some of the drawbacks of it.
Mm-hmm. I think I know in my Juniper Junction mysteries, I introduce new people in every book. There's that core group of my main character's family and they're very close friends. But there's sort of this group of people orbiting around that main group in every book, and that big group tends to change in every book. And sometimes one character will go into a different story, but that does make it easier when you've got like a touristy town and you've got people coming in and going out, and that does make it a little bit easier. And it goes back to what Mollie said, I think, which is, the crime rate is not necessarily any smaller in a small, you're still having the same number of murders per capita, say, in a small place as in a large place. It's not always true, but for the most part, I think that that's a reasonable thing to say. So I think there are far more positives to writing a small town than there are negatives. So, Mollie, did you have?
I think so. I mean, can't really think of any negatives. There are challenges, of course, but writing is full of challenges. So whether you're writing small town or city, you're going to have some challenges.
Right. One of the challenges is police. So every cozy writer has to have a character who's either in the police or knows the police or has some kind of a relationship with law enforcement. I shouldn't say every cozy has to. Most cozies do. There is some type of a law enforcement angle in the book. So how do you deal with the relationship with the local police or the sheriff's department? Is it one of antagonism, or is it one of respect? Is it sort of hindering? Is it trying to do things hand in hand? How does that work for you? How about Grace? Go ahead.
Well, one thing I wanted to do was to make sure I did not make the police out to be bumblers or not able to solve a crime. Of course, they're going in a different direction than my main character wants them to go. But I wanted to show a respect for the police, but there is a lot of banter between my main character and the police officer, because she wants to get involved and he doesn't want her to get involved, which is natural. So there's always that little friction. But you want to be careful that, you don't go into the stereotype that, the police don't know what they're doing. And, me as an amateur sleuth, I know better, you want to avoid that. So that's the challenge. So.
Molly?
Well, I have a lot of series. And so I think that I have like probably one of each of those, but I have my first series. I think you have to keep it real and as much as you can. In my first series, my main character is a stay-at-home mom and a freelance reporter. So her relationships with the police are antagonistic.
Mm-hmm.
Reporters and cops don't usually get along that well. I mean, sometimes they do, but that's kind of rare. And now my main character in my Beach Reads series has moved back to her small island. And there's one chief of police, and then there's another part-time police officer. And the chief happens to be the father of a man that she left at the altar. So they have a different kind of relationship. He does not like her, and she does not like him in the first book. Now, the second book, the relationship's changing a little bit. So that's always interesting to do. But I do have a bumbling police officer, I think, in one of my series. And then in the Buttermilk Creek series, they're very helpful and they work together a lot. So,
Mary Ellen? You need to come closer.
Sorry, you'll have to look down my tonsils.
Okay.
I think it's my laptop. I know I speak softly, but I think it's also the microphone. But anyway, my Keepsake Cove series, I kind of avoided some of that by making the murder seem to be an accident. There were no bullet holes and so on. It was people dying that, could have been an accident. And but my main character didn't believe it, didn't believe that this could have happened, and is investigating pretty much under the radar of the police. Now, in A Wicked Yarn, we couldn't pretend it was an accident because it was the body found in the middle of the craft fair the next morning with all these craft items spread around it, and his head was bashed in. So he couldn't have done that himself. So but I kind of still had her not interacting with the police. She was mostly trying to protect somebody who was under suspicion and trying to find out who actually could be point the police towards somebody who would be more likely. And in the next book, the one I'm working on now, I'm setting up a romance with the main character and the police chief. So that's going to be a little bit tricky to handle. And I haven't quite figured that out yet. So we'll see what happens.
In my Juniper Dungeon series, the main character, Lily, her brother is on the police force. Mm-hmm. So that's how I handle it. But he doesn't just feed her information. He tries to only give her information that she could conceivably find on her own without him. In other words, public information, I guess you'd call it. Maybe hard to find public information, but he doesn't want her meddling in police business. And she doesn't see it as meddling. She just sees it as sort of doing her own thing. And if it happens to conflict with what the police are doing, well, that's kind of too bad. So that's how I handle it. And since they're brother and sister, there's sort of a natural give and take in that relationship. They bicker like real siblings do. Mm-hmm. But they've always got each other's back. So let's see. We have one question. How do you keep track of your characters and residents in the small town? I'm thinking like a book Bible. Do you have something like that?
Yeah.
Okay. So can you describe it? Is it like a notebook? Like how do you do it? How do you structure your book Bible?
Can I start? I'll just.
Sure.
I just keep a running list of the characters, and because you don't want to describe your characters having green eyes in one book and blue eyes in another. One time I had my character driving one type of car, and later in the book realized I had her driving a different type of car, a different brand. So, it's good, to if nothing else, just keep a list, because I only have 3 books in my series, and I get confused. I can't imagine having 30 books in a series and multiple series. I don't know how Mollie and Mary Ellen do it with all these series. So
it can get confusing. I don't know about Mary Ellen. It can get confusing. That's why it's really important to. I have a computer. Have it on my computer. I call it my cheat sheet. But you really need to keep track of that. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Mary Ellen?
I keep a list on my computer, and I mostly, when I'm coming up with names for a new character, I don't want to repeat the name that somebody already had, their first name, and I don't want to have initials the same if I can avoid it. You can't always. I mean, there's a lot of J names out there, but you try to keep a variety so people don't get too confused, and that I don't get confused either.
I do it longhand. I have the old-fashioned notebook that I keep the notes in about every character for every book or every series. I want to know first what's next for each of you, and because we have, it looks like 3 minutes left. So what's next for each of you, and give us an author recommendation. Mary Ellen, let's start with you.
Okay, what's next? Well, let's see. My Wicked Yarn dealt with knitting. My main character's in knitting, and that continues, but the next one will focus on crocheting a little bit, and it's called Stitched in Crime. It'll be out in December. Now, an author recommendation. Gosh, your mind goes blank because you like so many. Maya Corrigan.
Okay.
She was just on here a little
bit.
I read her book and really enjoyed it.
Okay. Mollie?
I'm working on the second book in the Beach Reade series, Once Upon a Seaside Murder. It's due soon, like maybe in a couple of weeks. And I'm also finishing up the Audrey Hepburn Heist, which is the second book in the Jean Harlow, that series. And as far as writers to recommend, I have been reading a lot of historical mysteries, and I still really like Rosemary Stevens' historical series, the Beau Brummel series. So if you like historicals, check out Rosemary Stevens.
Okay. Grace?
My next book actually comes out April 20th. It's called Upstaged by Murder. And in it, my main character, Laura Bishop, is talked into entering a competition to become the next TV homestaging star. And of course, murder, happens. So, and an author, we all have these writing partners and people that we work closely with, and our careers seem to, run the same path. I would recommend Connie Berry's Kate Hamilton series. I've seen how her series has grown, and they're more traditional than cozy. She calls them traditionals with cozy elements, but I highly recommend her books.
All right. Next for me is coming out in mid-April. It's the 5th book in my Juniper Duncan series called Mayday. And I am working on the 2nd book in the Kate May historical mystery collection called The King's Men. So far, it's called The King's Men. I would recommend Susanna Calkins if you like historical mystery also. She is a favorite of mine.
Oh.
So we're up at 12:50. I want to thank everybody for participating, all the questions, all the comments, and of course, these three wonderful ladies on our panel. And thank you to Katie Kelly too for hosting everything. Thank you. Bye-bye, everyone.
Bye now. Bye. Thank you.